Hi everybody, and welcome to this our French seam tutorial video. Now French seams can be used on all different kinds of fabrics, but in general they're used for fabrics that are more delicate and floaty. So this fabric that I'm using for my skirt, as you can see, is super drapey, so French seams will work really well for it. You may have seen French seams before on lingerie items or anything made from silk because they're great at enclosing raw edges to prevent fraying. And the idea behind the French seam is that you sew each seam twice. The first time that you sew your seam will feel quite odd because you'll be having all of your raw edges on the outside of your garment, which is basically the reverse of sewing a normal seam. But then you'll turn that seam over onto itself and restitch it, which basically creates a little tube with all of your raw edges enclosed inside, as you can kind of see here. From the outside of your garment, your seam will pretty much just look like any other seam, but from the inside you get this nice enclosed neat seam with all your raw edges sewn into it. So let me show you how we do this. Now we're going to be sewing a few different French seams today, but I am going to start off with a French seam along the bottom of the pocket piece of the Hollyburn skirt. So I have my skirt piece here, and here is my pocket piece, and this bottom edge is the one that we're going to be finishing with a French seam. Now usually when we sew together this pocket piece, we fold it with the right sides of the fabric together like this. We would sew our seam along this edge and we would finish the raw edge in whatever way we wanted, so pinking or zigzag or serger. So it would just be like this with the right sides together. However, like I said, because we're going to be sewing a French seam, we want to do the opposite of what seems normal. So what we're going to be doing is turning our pocket round the other way so that the wrong sides of the fabric are together. Because the first time we sew our seam, we want to make sure that our raw edges are on the outside as opposed to the inside. So we're just going to pin this together and get it ready to sew. Now we're ready to sew, and this is important guys, we are not going to be sewing a 5/8 of an inch seam as we're used to. This time we're just sewing a 1/4 inch seam, and this will all become clear very soon as to why we're doing this. And here's our 1/4 inch seam. Next step, we need to trim this seam down. I know it's already small, but we want it about half the width it is. So we're going to trim about 1/8 of an inch off of this seam, and basically we're trying to make the seam as bulk free as possible. So here is our teeny tiny raw edge that's around about 1/8 of an inch wide. And this raw edge is now going to be enclosed within the second seam that we sew. So we want to basically turn the seam over on itself again, like this, fold the fabric over, and we're going to re-sew this. Basically you get almost a little love heart shape because we're turning that seam, like I said, over on itself, and we're going to pin it in place. So we've turned our pocket basically the correct way that we would want it to be. So the right sides of the fabric are now together, and what we're going to do is pin through these layers again, enclosing that little raw edge within our layers of the fabric with right sides together, and just making sure that it's staying in the right place to sew. What I like to do is actually place my pins in the same direction of the seam rather than perpendicular, because it helps to enclose that little raw edge within that little tube that we've created by placing the right sides of our fabric together. Now this is all pinned, we are ready to sew again, and for the second time we are just sewing a 1/4 inch seam. And the reason that we've just sewn 1/4 inch seams both these times for the French seam is that the 1/4 plus a 1/4 plus a little bit extra, considering that we're folding the fabric over, is going to give us the total seam length of 5/8 of an inch, as is required for this pattern. And we've just sewn a French seam. Here it is, a little bit of a closer look, and as you can see, all of our raw edges are neatly enclosed within the little tube that we created. From the outside it just looks like a regular seam, but from the inside it just looks pretty nifty. So I'm going to show you this again using the 2 side seams of the skirt. Like I said, we're going to want to do the opposite of what feels natural. So taking our skirt front piece and our skirt back piece, we are going to place them wrong sides together and sew the seam. And remember, it's just a 1/4 inch seam that we're sewing. Then we trim down that raw edge from a 1/4 inch to 1/8 of an inch, so we're cutting it in half. We then turn that seam over on itself and pin it in place to enclose those raw edges inside that little tube. So our fabric is now right sides together and ready to sew. Once again, we're sewing a 1/4 of an inch seam, and once you've done that, your French seam is complete. I hope you've enjoyed this French seam tutorial. They really are as simple as that, but obviously if you have any questions or queries, please as always leave a comment down below and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Bye for now!